Welcome to Jack's Corner, where conservative values meet national headlines, and truth and reality have a seat at the table. From Louisville, Kentucky, here's your host, Jack Richardson.
Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality has a seat at the table. Today I want to talk about a number of current events, but highlighting the connection of the psychotic thinking of the left and evil and its consequences. But we all expect evil to do what it does, but what we don't expect is for good to do nothing. So I'm encouraging some introspection, hopefully driven by connecting the dots between the chaos in the world and how it is enabled by the indolence of those on the right side of the political spectrum. Now, I will remind my listeners that this podcast and my website is fully funded by me. I get no income from it. So why do I do it? Because I love my freedoms and want to live in a free country that is being destroyed by the lies of the left and the laziness of the right. Before I get into the main topics of today, I want you to think about this. We have seen all the protesters around the country, most of which are organized by professional paid protesters backed by socialist and communist organizations that want to destroy our country and the Constitution. Folks, there is no right to do that which is unconstitutional or destructive to our country. Our Constitution is not a suicide pact. These protesters are lawless, anti-American insurrectionists and need to feel the full weight of the law come down on them. And you, the listeners, must stop tolerating this kind of conduct and hold your elected representatives accountable. Okay, now let's first start off with what I called the consequence of a leftist victory. Now, this is a little bit deep and heavy, but stick with me. The slow death of the West is well documented and hastened by denial and the delusion that it won't happen. But then that is the byproduct of those who are addicted to their comforts and conveniences, which I talk about in my book, America's Systemic Psychosis. And these are the comforts and conveniences that have made them indolent and lazy. What is amazing is that they give no thought to the consequences. The loss of your freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and the right to protect yourself by bearing arms. The left wins by default, not because they have good ideas. Sadly, for many, our constitutional rights are just theories or concepts that they don't use or perceive having any value. But that is because they don't understand what it would be like or feel like if they were to lose them. The left will eventually impose unbearable restrictions upon your life where you will not be able to bear your suffering and will have no avenue to complain about it or fight back. The COVID mandates were just the beginning and a perfect example. You better hope you die before that happens, or you will face two alternatives: great suffering, which starts with your own self-recriminations, or suicide. The bottom line is that it is your fault because you were not paying attention. You ignored the warnings, and I'm here to rob you of the justification or any justification on the basis that you didn't know, because I'm telling you now, and I'm warning you again. Many people have been warning you, not just me. The death of the West is not wokeness, although those behind it are part of the problem. It's not China, because they are in the fight themselves with the Uyghurs, that is Muslims, in their country. But they will use the problem to undermine us. And no, it's not Russia either, because while our problem is their problem and the world's problem as well, they have no inhibitions or concerns about public opinion when it comes to exterminating and taking care of the problem with brute force. They are immune to public opinion. So you ask, what could it be? There's a lack of understanding of what civilization is, and we are in a war by those who are against civilization itself. And the West has not been listening. The West has accepted ludicrous falsehoods, and we are seeing that now with half of America's youth supportive of Hamas. Can you imagine that? This terrorist organization that murders people just randomly. And the youth see the West as guilty of war crimes when we defend our Western values. And you know why? Because you paid for them to be taught that by Marxist professors. Mom, Dad, where's your outrage that your children have been mentally abused? Oh, no, you don't. You don't have the excuse of not knowing how it happened to your kids. It happened right under your noses. With the intelligentsia that occupies our colleges and universities, any opinion that differs from theirs will be punished, particularly when any of their lies are challenged. Most of their problems stem from not a God delusion, but a godless delusion, which resulted in the typical Western trap of believing that the whole world was to be just like us, or that, aren't we all just really alike? No, we are not in a kumbaya situation. We are not all alike. We are not and never will be alike. This is the trap that George Bush fell into, believing that the world could be democratized. We got rid of Iraq, which was really the counterbalance to Iran, giving us an even bigger headache that we're seeing today. It was again the trap of theory detached from reality that so many academic types and the so-called experts fall into and talk the rest of us into. We see how this has manifested itself in the Middle East, particularly when the Israeli Defense Forces top brass years ago lived in an arrogant delusion stemming from their education at Harvard. As Dr. Thomas Sowell once said, in every crisis you will likely find at least one person there from Harvard. However, and that's kind of funny in a way, but it's funny because there's always a little bit of truth in all jest. And there's a lot more truth in jest in that remark of Sowell's. However, Israel is not the only country suffering from the academia intelligentsia's assembly line of delusional theorists. America is the most infected. The delusion and mistake that the Israelis made and committed was that Gaza was a good idea, as was the two-state solution. I'm talking about when that was going to be used as a Palestinian state, not the Gaza of today, which had to be destroyed because of the idea that those in Gaza, particularly the Palestinians, would live peacefully once they had their own land. That's where the gross naivety and belief in the lie caused the problem. The whole issue with the Palestinian lie is there is no such thing that is Palestinians. Historically, back to the beginning of recorded history, that land belonged to the Jews. The Palestinians were not native to the area now known as Palestine. In fact, the ancient Romans named the area Palestine to identify the area geographically, not for the people. The so-called Palestinians today were immigrants shortly after that area was carved up after the Balfour Declaration, and there was migration to the area for jobs. Previously, it was a deserted hellhole, as Mark Twain once noted in his travels. Americans have been gaslighted as to the Palestinian plight and the narrative that it is their land. Folks, please stop showing stupidity. This was never Palestinian land, nor was it a people. Here's a brutal truth that the idiots of the West have had a difficult time accepting. The Islamists are playing the world, and particularly America, and pretend to take up for the conjured-up plight of the Palestinians so that they can be a convenient proxy as Hamas is and was for Iran. None of the Arab nations will accept the Palestinians because they have been taught from birth to be terrorists. My friends, it is in their curriculum. Trump was criticized for saying it until it was proven he was correct. I will remind everyone that Egypt kicked the self-proclaimed Palestinians out because the Arab Spring and the Muslim Brotherhood, which caused the insurrection and political instability in Egypt. In fact, the border between Egypt and Gaza is several layers thicker than the one between Gaza and Israel to keep them out. There is an Islamic holy war raging right now to which the West is oblivious. Europe is gone. Angela Merkel and her toxic policies and philosophies have destroyed Europe and the cultures that are being overrun by Islam. May she burn in hell for the intentional destruction she has caused millions. As Christians, we are not called to condone evil, and to treat Merkel as anything but evil would be evil. She came from East Germany, the communist side before reunification. I don't think she ever lost her toxic ideologies. In England, things are even worse. Every major city in Britain is run by a Muslim mayor. Isn't that absolutely astounding? What insanity. It is not racist to like your own culture. You have a right to your own culture. Try talking about racism in the Arab or Muslim world and you won't last long. They are not inclusive, but the idiotic West says we must. And that is suicide. Now, what I'm about to tell you is too deep of an issue to discuss at length here, but suffice it to say that we are in what Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the previous leader of Iran, contended was the fourth jihad, wherein Muslims would spread out across the world and become influential in government, eventually changing the culture to accept Islam. And it's happening right beneath your nose. Furthermore, current leaders in Iran are focused on bringing about the 12th Imam because they believe that to do so, it will bring about an apocalypse and the end of the world, which they want for some strange reason. But for the toxins we have in our colleges and the universities, the West would not be in the perilous position it is now. The West is sinfully gullible. It has told itself that Islam is a peaceful religion and that Islamic extremists have nothing to do with Islam. George Bush was a proponent of that as well. Well, shame on him. That too is a lie. When surveys were done in the United States of the Islamic communities here, and particularly in Michigan, over 60% of those surveyed believed that the massacre of men, women, and children in Israel on October the 7th was justified. I bet you didn't know that. The Islamists, the Muslims, are not like us, but they will pretend to be. The Harvard elites and others in academia and intelligentsia will call you a racist if you say otherwise. Frankly, I could care less what they call me. America would do well to take on the same attitude. Why let yourself be controlled by the opinions of others, particularly those on a fast escalator to hell? That sounds bombastic and blunt, but you know it to be true. So now the question is, are the academic elites the problem, or is it your personal PR department? If you find it so necessary to be liked and avoid criticism that you are willing to ignore reality and place yourself or your family or your nation at risk, then you are the one that has a psychological and emotional problem. The totalitarian Islamic world movement has undermined the core institutions and values of the West. And of course, the Democrat left has played a large part in this. After all, they have talked you into believing that you can have your own truth, as there is no such thing as an objective truth to the Democrat left. It's inconvenient for them. As Melanie Phillips, the British journalist, said in a discussion at the annual Jewish News Syndicate convention, if there's no such thing as truth, then there is no such thing as lies. Think about that. And we are all suffering the daily circus of Democrats telling the most blatant and obvious lies. They know they are lying, and they know you know they are lying, and they don't care. They can no longer blush. They have lost any semblance of a conscience, code of justice, or ability to exhibit any rationality, and they know you will do nothing about it. The West has been practicing cultural suicide for the last several decades, as it has lost all contact with reality, and particularly the realization of the mass barbarity in the world, especially within Islam. I want you to think about this for a moment. The Islamists have convinced the West that they are evil colonialists. Now that's the pot calling the kettle black. If you read the Quran and know your history, you would realize it's not a religion. Muhammad got his adherents, his followers, from raping, pillaging, and plundering and dividing the spoils and conquering lands. You either converted or your head was chopped off. Don't think it's any different today. If you do, you're a fool. One thing that Phillips said that was so beautifully poised, and I will give it my own interpretation here, is that the Palestinians were invented as identity thieves to steal the Jews' identity so as to take their land, which is what Islam has done all of its history. What is so profound is that the fools of the West have been led to believe that the Palestinians are entitled to their own land, when historically and archaeologically there is no such thing as Palestinians as a people group. Come on, folks. There is historical and archaeological proof that the Jews were indigenous to that area for thousands of years before Christ. Every Western liberal and elite and hell-bound hedonist and reprobate teaching in so-called institutions of higher education have paralyzed the West as it faces the Islamic death cult. Speaking of death cults, that is exactly what the Democrat left is. They have become the party of death as they not only support abortion, but even after birth. But they are also supporters of euthanasia. And in between, they want to surgically alter your kids, and if you won't let them, they will take your kids from you. For them, it's like the movie Logan's Run, where you are given 30 years to live, and in that 30 years you can be as perverse as you want. Then they will kill you. It was hedonism gone wild. What was science fiction in the movie has now become reality within the Democrat left party. So now you're probably wondering, well, how could Islam be the greatest threat when we are looking at the threat from China and Russia? Well, it's quite simple, folks. Islam becomes the proxy for the two big nuclear powers, and the barbarity of Islam is a useful tool for both China and Russia, as Islam is totalitarian. It is not a threat to China or Russia because they have no hesitation to use brute force against Islam, as we are seeing what's happening in China today with the Uyghurs. While Judeo-Christianity created the West and brought civilization into the world, it is dying, and the persecution to come will be earned and deserved. I'm not so sure it isn't a judgment, God's judgment. Now, the choice is yours. You can wait for the inevitable, or you can get up and fight. Now, let me leave you with this one last thought on this topic. A good friend of mine, when he was 10 years old, watched his father executed by the Iranian guard in his front yard. He barely made it out of the country alive. They are not like us, folks. And when you consider how they baked babies alive in ovens on October the 7th, there is only one word for them, and that is they are subhuman monsters. Ignore it at your own peril. Now I want to talk about something I've written recently, and that is the silence in the face of evil equals complicity with evil. And I talk about the connection between the Muslim Brotherhood and anti-Semitism in our universities. We were on the correct side in World War II, but now we tolerate the spread of totalitarian Islamic influence in our universities. When will God's patience run out for a people He has so blessed in this country, who now tolerate and are indifferent to the 15 million Jews left in the world? Bridget Gabriel, founder of Act for America, whose life story is amazing, and I've talked to the lady, and she is absolutely wonderful and incredible what she's done. She barely escaped death from radical Islam, and she is one of the foremost experts in the goals and aims of Islam in their push for world domination. In a recent warning, she wrote, "Islamic enclaves devour America's core and transforms your Judeo-Christian neighborhoods from Texas's Epic City to New York's Hamlets." She says she is shocked but not surprised, because for decades she screamed this warning about the insurgency in this country. From Texas to Dearborn and Minnesota's Somali hubs, New Jersey, New York, it's a Muslim Brotherhood Hamas network, posing as moderates, waging a stealth jihad. The 2007 Holy Land Foundation trial exposed their 100-year plan to infiltrate Congress, legislatures, and institutions, and it was not just to join and be good citizens, but to dominate. Polls show 80% of the Palestinians cheered on October 7th after the massacres in Israel. These very same enclaves call us infidels, dogs, and hellbound, demanding our tolerance while plotting supremacy. They twist our Constitution, wage lawfare, grab land for compounds like Epic City, to isolate, not unite. They don't assimilate. Gabriel tells us that interfaith talks with imams are a vile ruse and urges our leaders to reject it. Naive clergy and officials are lured by tolerance and hand the wolves our government and institutions, enabling subjugation, which must be stopped immediately. I have a good friend who is a Christian Lebanese who has shared with me the horrors arising from the mistakes that Lebanon made in allowing 2 million Muslims into their country. The country is now in chaos. There is no peaceful coexistence with them. Their goal, as it has been for the last 1,300 years, is world domination. As Dr. Judy Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, has testified, he said that if Iran gets the nuclear bomb, they will use it, as they are a death cult. Americans are so slothful and asleep as to the danger that could destroy our nation. Jasser has warned that you cannot negotiate with Iran, Hamas, or any radical Islamist. Their religion preaches that deceit and lying is the way to domination. This is not hyperbole, but reality. Let a bomb go off in this country and the economy collapses. It doesn't take multiple bombs, just one, even one that misses and explodes offshore. The shock would devastate the markets and the economy. It's not so much a physical destruction as it is economic. Moreover, Iran will become a nuclear proxy for Russia and China. We must remove the threat, and we must start living in the reality that the left in this country has brought us, but nothing but basically peril. Further, delay is deadly, and tolerance for the left is equally deadly. I'm hoping that Trump will finish what the Israelis have started and destroy Iran's nuclear capacity. Well, moving on to another topic, here's an example of the insanity and evil of the left and how close we came to disaster in the 2024 elections, particularly if Kamala Harris had been elected. Well, that imbecile Governor Tim Walz, remember him, the VP candidate, thinks that China is the new moral authority. My goodness, I'm glad I was sitting down at the time I heard that. He thinks that China is now the new moral authority, and he could have been our vice president. The Trump administration, having Israel's back, allowed Israel to take out most of, if not all of Iran's nuclear facilities, thus avoiding nuclear proliferation and the risk of a smuggled nuclear bomb into Israel or the United States. Even Muslim experts agree that Iran would use the bomb once it had one in hand. Now, fools like Walz and the Democrat left will have their place in eternity, and it's not a paradise. But until then, I don't want to suffer the catastrophe and destruction that they can bring if allowed in power. Yes, you heard it right. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, that mentally disabled state, suggested that given the life-saving events that Israel and the U.S. have taken against Iran, China may now be the new moral authority in the world. Imagine that. We are stopping the greatest sponsor of terrorism from getting a nuclear bomb, and Walz says that we have lost our moral authority? Wow, that's amazing how close we came. And that, well, this is just emblematic of what makes up the Democrat left. People like he and people like Kamala Harris. Folks, this is a frightening insight into the mind of the very sick, basically a very sick and evil man. Now, for a majority of us, we knew that this sycophant for communism parading around as a paragon of virtue has to go. Screams for his resignation need to be so loud that it breaks glass. And to think that he was the vice presidential nominee for the Democrat Party is frightening. Now, he has visions of grandeur of running for president again. Everybody, you need to wake up. Everyone needs to wake up. The Democrat Left Party is an association for the mentally ill. And that's not a stretch because surveys are now showing it. And thank you, God, as I have been calling this out since I was a teenager. You know, it has to be pretty extreme for it to be that obvious even to a teenager. So now I ask you, when did you become aware of the mental illness of the left and the liberals and more recently the Democrat Party? The only good thing about the mental illness of the Democrat is that it is a litmus test. Anyone who would vote for the Democrat left must be suspect of the same mental illness. Don't let them anywhere near your levers of power. And since the good book commands us not to be unequally yoked, take inventory with whom you are yoked. Let me repeat and end with this. Let this soak in. Tim Walz suggested that China was likely the new moral authority in the world. Consign him to the dustbin of history, as God has an even better place for this wicked man. Just make sure you're not complicit with the likes of him. Now, one has to wonder who funds all of this sickness. Well, I have suggested we change the inheritance laws. Now, this is a bit extreme, but I think you'll get my point. Who would have thought that America's biggest enemies would be the billionaires it created? I can't resist saying this, and particularly reminding those on Mount Olympus that they can't escape death. And no sooner than they are buried, they will be irrelevant and forgotten. Of course, that'll be the same for all of us. All their attempts to spit in the eye of God and rule the world will be for naught. Instead of doing good, they did evil because that is who they are. They spread lies, deceit, and falsehoods in a vain attempt to cling to power forever. And it is never for the good of their fellow man, but rather to justify their own hedonism. I once had a law school professor in a wills and estates class who believed in taxing away inheritances. I thought that was extreme, and to some extent it is today too. And it truly is, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. He was not all wrong. Given how these psychotic misfit billionaires are supporting the destruction of the country that gave them the surreal life they live and their sanctimonious hypocrisy, it's time to give them a taste of the assembly line. That is, the reality from which they are detached. And who are these worthless pieces of flesh soaking up our resources? Well, as Breitbart News reported it, a new investigation by Peter Schweitzer Government's Accountability Institute, the GAI, has revealed how the recent No Kings nationwide Day of Defiance protest official partners have bagged $114 million since 2019 from the Arabella Advisors dark money network, and how professional protest organizations use tax dollars as a force multiplier. So why would those who have benefited so much from our form of government try to destroy the very institutions that allowed them the luxury in which they live? Now stop. Listen to me. This is not hyperbole nor bombastic. These are billionaire, pampered, spoiled biological byproducts that are trying to justify their existence by tearing down the very society that made it possible for them to be the reprobates that they are. Here's a newsflash. Christy Walton, the heir of Walmart, is using her billions to make you have to compete with slave labor she desires in her support for the open borders, so that she can have someone available to wipe her rear, as one Democrat legislator actually said as one of the necessities for having illegals here. Can you believe that? Now, that's not just me being adjective-laden with profane words, but rather it is what we heard from another Democrat who recently actually said that the immigrants are needed to wipe, well, I won't say the word, their butts. These are your Democrat left representatives. God help us all. This is not me being hyperbolic. I'm telling you what one of the Democrats had the audacity to say, and others have been saying. These protests in LA and around the country are not organic. They are planned and financed. And I bet many think it is so spontaneous. If I had my druthers, those billionaires supporting insurrection would be jailed. Their money's confiscated, and they'd be placed in hard labor the rest of their lives. No, that is not cruel. In fact, it probably would be the very thing that might save them. So what is my action plan? Well, I will stop shopping Walmart as I have Target. I don't like funding my enemies. If every one of us would each do just one thing each week to push back on the insanity that is occurring in this country, we would take our country back. Just think back on what you did to Bud Light. You made companies change their course, and you can do it again. In fact, Walmart is already feeling the backlash. Let's keep it going. Now, this is a good point to ask the question, is the problem capitalism or moral bankruptcy? In a recent article, I wrote about boardroom hedonists whose God is the dollar. It's as old as sin itself. Their descendants, better identified as liberals and leftists today, are the great sophistrists of today. They changed the name of sin, but the demons are the same. Today, those who sit in the boardrooms of corporations around America are morally rudderless, as their focus is only on the bottom line, no matter that their decisions are eroding the ground out from under the system that allows them to prosper. Walmart is still selling items that push the LGBTQ plus agenda on children, despite announcing in November that it would move away from the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. As revealed in an investigation from the conservative nonprofit Building America's Future, that's BAF, BAF released a report titled Pride Watch, How Big Retail Secretly Targets Children with LGBTQ Merchandise, showcasing how retailers are still targeting children even if it's not as obvious as it was in the peak of the Biden administration years. Folks, you have to vote with your wallets. So don't support these hedonists and these big corporations. Vote with your wallets. But at this point, I want to switch to another topic as I close, and I entitled this, A Pride Parade Worth Attending. What a wonderful sight to behold. The very army that has protected our freedoms and have halted the advance of evil across the globe celebrated its 250th anniversary. This is indeed a parade worthy of pride. It's not about celebrating your sexual perversity. It's about honoring those who have volunteered to sacrifice their lives so we could have life, liberty, and happiness. And yes, even those who choose to be profane and deviant. Last weekend, the Democrat left demonstrated for no king, but they are okay with queens. The Democrats stand for everything wrong, and we are educating people of their evil every day, and you need to join that fight too. Now, some have criticized the Army Parade, concerned in comparing it to the Nazi goose step leading up to World War II. But folks, if it is in the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, then I say, damn the naysayers. Unfortunately, some of those naysayers are on my side of the political spectrum. Get a grip. Well, as a leader in Republican circles, my message to you and yours is I have graduated from the school of sycophants, and I am sick and tired of those who have grown up in office only to find fault in everything good for fear that it could be used as a pretext for the left to use it. Well, let me introduce you to a truth. The left has never needed a pretext to do anything, particularly anything bad. Withholding doing things that are good, necessary, and needed in the current reality for fear that the left will use them later is absurd and cowardly. So thank you, President Trump, for teaching some Republicans how to be men and how to be a leader. Yes, the time has come for term limits, and while the Democrat left are due for treason trials, some in the Republican Party are due for purging. Now, for some of the idiots in Congress and others around the country observing the parade and condemning it, let me remind you that the Chinese, the Russians, and other adversaries around the world are taking note, and this parade is sending a very important message to them. I can assure you that they are getting the message, even though some in this country are not, and shame on them. Happy 250th birthday, U.S. Army, and happy birthday, President Trump. We don't deserve you, but thank you for your service. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.